Alright, so I got this fully welded on here now. I cut those non-crush sleeves, and I got the bolts in there and everything. You can see in there I got the nuts welded on. This thing can slide back and forth freely, so when it wears down and everything, and it's a little bit imbalanced, so you can probably kind of see it move a little bit because this isn't perfect, but I got everything bolted down, and then I Loctited every single one of these, even on this thing, so it's not going to shake apart. I welded this little tab on here and tapped it. I tapped the threads for a one of those little bicycle handle brake adapters, like that. Let me find it. Just one of those guys, and I used a metric tap. I forgot what it was. I think it was an M6 by like 1.0 or something, but apparently this is actually a little bit wider than an M6, so it's just going to crush it down, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to end up taking that off there and probably soldering the end to keep it from fraying, but yeah, it'll just crush down, but doesn't really matter, it's still going to slide through, but that's what I'm going to use for that. And also, I ground the end of this cable down. It was, I don't know if I showed it or not, but it was like twice the size as it needed to be, and it fits in this brake perfectly, and this cable is like barely fitting in there too, but that's fine because then it won't come out. And yeah, I got plenty of length, so I'm going to go ahead and zip tie this cable to the frame, and then put this in, and then try to hook up the screw to the cable. Alright, so I got this all cable tied up. I had to double up on the cable ties because I bought the stupid small ones. Bought like 4 packs of them. But yeah, I got the cable pushed out the end there, and I marked where I want to cut it at, right there. And yeah, I'm going to cut it and then see if I can try to get some of this back on there just to kind of help it from, you know, looking bad. But if I can't, then that's no big deal. Alright, so I got that end that I cut off put in there just lightly, and I'm going to see if I can melt the casing around it and pull the metal and the rubber out. So as you can see, that worked way too well. I got it just hot enough to pull out without completely making a mess, and I even had the vacuum there so the smoke alarm didn't go off. Alright, so I got that lightly tapped back on there all the way, and then ground down the edges that got smashed when I was hammering it on, and used some wire cutters to kind of crimp down the ends so it won't come out when I try to pull the cable out. So yeah, I tried jamming that in the hole, and the force required to pinch it just kind of made it twist. So I'm going to find another one, and then I'm going to tap that hole out the right size, and the cable wouldn't really fit through there anyway, and it was kind of already busted, so I'll just have to go find another one. And yeah, it's kind of weird they make them out of aluminum. I guess it's easier to make that way. Alright, so I found a steel one of those on a one of these 80cc 2-stroke bike kit carburetors, so that'll work. So here it is, cleaned up a little bit. I think that was the carb off of the bike that got hit by a freight train, literally. But yeah, it's a little bent, so it'll work though. I'm gonna go ahead and drill that out to the right size with my tap and drill chart, and thread it in and see if the cable fits through. So this is not standard American. That tap that I tapped had the right thread count. I think it's 0.1 or 1.0, and this thing is an actual size because it doesn't have that little widened out part on it. It's just a normal, basically a bolt with a hole through the middle. Whereas these ones, I guess, are M6 by 1, but they're stretched out, so it doesn't work properly. Kind of an oddball. Or maybe they're M7 and I just didn't look at it close enough for the width. But anyway, the good news is that I've already tapped this hole out to that, but I'm going to re-tap it because the tap is not going in there smoothly, so there's probably some weld in there or something. Alright, so I got that tapped out, and I was looking at this, and it's kind of loose. So I'm going to go find a bag that is who knows where, that has one of those little three-way connections for the rear brakes on a BMX bike. It's just basically one cable, and then it has a loop, and the loop goes through the little three-way, and that's what I'm going to use. Alright, so I haven't found that bag yet, and just a little lesson for me. I saw two identical Hyperco bikes with front and rear brakes the other day, and normally I would go right up there with my truck and pick them up, but I didn't, and just went up to see if they were still there. They're not. And yeah, this is a Hyperco bike, but it used to have front and rear and all kinds of stickers, but I stripped it down and it's super light, so I'm not gonna take that off, but that's basically what I'm looking for right there. Okay, so I never really could find that bag or anything the right thickness to remake that part out of, but I found this deck, and it's already got kind of a lip on the end, as you can see. So if I just manipulate that up a little bit and then cut a little piece out, I can start shaping it into what I need to have for a three-way. Okay, so this is the piece I got bent up so far, and I'm gonna clean up the inside of there. Alright, so I got that little guy made. Had to kind of elongate that hole a little bit, so that way this little guy would fit in there for the cable. Sorry, it's not focusing. But yeah, now I just need to make the thing that puts two cables, one on each side of this, so that way it's nice and centered when it gets pulled on. Okay, so it took a few tries, but I finally got this bolt drilled out for the cable to go through both sides. It was very hard to get the drill bit to go through the center of the bolt, and I broke the right size drill bit, so I had to use a big one, but I'll just hope that the bolt doesn't pull apart. I also trimmed the access off of this bolt too, so that way it's not sticking out so far. And the cable I'm going to use for the twin-sided part is going to be the cable off of the twist throttle for the motorized bike kit. Okay, so I got everything put back together now, and got all the cable made up and everything. Had to use some kind of rigged stuff here to get it centered. I made that part, but that bolt that I made with the two holes in it ended up pulling apart, like I said, just snapped right in half. I took it for a test ride with no throttle cable, and it stops pretty well. I mean, it's not necessarily the best brake for this application, but for a mechanical brake it is pretty good. And with these clutches, a lot of people think that right when you let off the throttle that they'll disengage, but that's not the case with the centrifugal clutch, because the springs still have the momentum, so it's still engaged until it drops below the RPM to you know, disengage. But yeah, the motor does help it slow down, and the brake is pretty good. The travel on it is a lot better now. I found that the Trike, it doesn't do any skids or anything. It's not like crazy powerful, and it doesn't lock up. But I found that the trick is if you take some really heavy, like 90 weight oil, and just put it down there where the contact is for this bar to put leverage on the brakes, it actually eases up how hard you need to push it, and it limits the amount of stretch in the cable, which you can obviously see there is quite a bit of. You can probably see it moving right there. But yeah, it works pretty well, and I can stop pretty easily now. I have to touch my feet to the ground sometimes, but I mean, it'll hold the motor back a little bit. But yeah, pretty successful brakes for only 60 bucks. I think it was like 70 with the cable. So yeah, and all these materials were free, by the way. I already had them except for the bolts. Those were like $5. So yeah, pretty good setup. Also, the measurement for the throttle cable was incorrect because I didn't account for the fact that they don't measure them by the actual casing of the cable. They measure them by the cable itself. So the cable reaches this thing, but it doesn't go to there, and then the cable casing does not go to here. So that's kind of a problem. So I'm probably gonna go back to that same rigged split cable deal where it takes off when you start it, but it's no big deal. At least I have brakes now. Okay, so I got the throttle all hooked up. The throttle cable I ordered off of Go Power Sports was not the right length, and it wasn't the right thread to go into here, which this is a mountain bike brake lever, by the way. So I went ahead and went to a bike shop, and they cut me a custom length cable, and I put the little ends on it, and that's how I got it on there properly. And I'm just now getting ready to strip it down so that way I can order new piston rings. I need to know what size to order, and I need a new head gasket because it has a lot of blow by. So yeah, but you can most of the time prevent blow by just leaving the breather tube for the crankcase, positive crankcase ventilation in the air filter, but I don't have that air filter, and I'd rather just get new piston rings because it's got blow by. Okay, so I got the gas tank and the header and the carb off. Now I'm gonna get this top plate off. Okay, so because of where I welded all this and I don't want to take the motor off, I'm not going to take this shroud off, fan shroud, to adjust the magneto, because I don't know if you can see that, but it's got really good spark, so that's not an issue. The spark plug is probably bad though, because it's got a lot of carbon buildup. Alright, so I got this thing pretty much stripped down all the way. Still gotta get the cylinder head off, but as you can see, I'm probably gonna go ahead and end up power washing this thing, because it's very dirty and it's probably not gonna cool as well with this oily dirt buildup on it. So yeah, probably ought to clean it off. Okay guys, so the head gasket appears to be not the issue. It came off in one piece because of the blow-by. That's how you know that the piston rings are bad and not the head gasket. So basically the oil was getting super hot, and it makes it small, and it can get into the cracks and soak in, help you get it off without it just, you know, splitting in half. But yeah, it was pretty much effortless. And then here's our problem right here. So as you can see, when the piston goes down, here, let me get it all the way to the bottom. See, it's completely shiny. There's no cross-zoning in it at all. But the catch is, the piston, there is like barely any taper out, and the piston is like almost exactly the same size as the bore. So I won't need to do any like piston oversizing or anything. Just needs some new rings and a new cross hone. So yeah, I gotta take the motor off anyway, so I might as well power wash everything and clean the flywheel, readjust the magneto and all that. But yeah, it should be a really good running engine after this. I might be able to get more like 8 or 9 horsepower out of it too. So yeah. Okay, I got this all cleaned up and torn down, and this piston is nowhere to be found on the internet. So basically it's not looking too bad, you know. I honestly don't feel comfortable putting the same piston back in it, and rod and everything. But since the head gasket isn't that bad, I could just, you know, throw a fresh hone in it and hope for the best, because the gasket could be reused. The camshaft has that little compression release thing. Let me just show you how that works. It's basically just a little weight, and when it's at idle, there's a little spring here, and there's not enough force, centrifugal force on that weight to keep it out, so it just adds a little bit of a compression release lobe to the cam, and sometimes that doesn't disengage, but I think that that's what makes it backfire, honestly. Might be wrong, but I like it to backfire, so I'm going to keep that on there. Just another look at the cylinder wall. It's not just glazed, but it's actually like kind of scored, so just probably deglaze or descore the cylinder wall with the hone and put it back together. Okay, so you can see I've got 3 different angle hones on it. with progressively less oil each time I did it, and turned out pretty good, nice and smooth. There's no spots that aren't honed, so that's good. Now I'm going to clean everything up and just start putting it back together.